So good morning, everyone. I'm out here exploring this winter paradise and thinking about some of the stories I've read about gold rushes in the past. One of the most famous gold rushes is the Klondike. It's also probably one of the best documented. And in researching, I came across a story about a party of people from New York City that decided they would try their luck at making it to Dawson City, not over the Chilkoot Pass or White Horse Trail or some of the other trails that led there, but over the glaciers of southern Alaska. This party was formed by a man named Deitz, and in January of 1898 he put an ad in the New York Herald saying he was looking for some people to put together a mining company, and that mining company was going to head to the Klondike and make their fortunes. Of the scores of people that applied, Deitz chose 18, and they met regularly on Sunday to familiarize themselves with Arctic travel and to test their strengths as best they could. What's amazing is all 18 of them, sorry, 19 with Deitz included, had never been outside of New York City other than on holiday. None of them had experience navigating in Arctic terrain, and for the most part they were sedentary people who were in poor physical shape. The party consisted of the typical assortment of Klondike gold seekers. There was a policeman, a doctor, a mineralogist, and an attorney, among others. But despite their shortcomings, they set out by sea and headed towards Alaska. In April of 1898, they actually made it to Alaska, and they were dropped off at Yakutat Bay. On arrival, they learned that most of their equipment had been so badly corroded by the salt water that it was unusable, and much of their food had also spoiled due to exposure of salt water. Nevertheless, they headed out over the glaciers, trying to find their way to the St. Elias Range and then down into Dawson. They found it so difficult to travel across the glacier that what they thought would take a week took 3. And the winds that hit them all day and all night rarely dropped below 60 miles an hour sustained, and often would gust over 100 miles an hour. They were unable to pitch their tents on the glacier surface. Instead, they would have to huddle up behind their gear and wait out the night. Within a week, no one spoke to each other, and as Deitz himself later said, the party resembled a group of deaf mutes. Snow blindness was a major concern, and none of them came with goggles like this or even glasses. Soon they were stumbling around half blind from the glare, and even their dogs suffered from it. On the rare sunny day, they could see the St. Elias Range peeking out ahead of them, and they would do whatever they could to try to make it there. However, in their haste, things started to turn bad. The first person to die was Deitz's brother-in-law. As they were speeding across the glacier, he fell into a crevasse, taking his sled and 4 dogs with him. His sled had a good majority of the food and other supplies on it. Within a week, another man suffered insanity from the snow blindness and ran off from the party. They never saw him again. A few weeks after that, another man succumbed to, as Deitz called it, insanity, and fell behind the party. He died as well. So after 3 months of traveling over the glacier, the party finally made it to the woods on the northern end of it. However, this was not relief. In fact, the alder woods were so thick, so full of brambles and so covered in dead vegetation that it was not any better, if not worse, than walking through the snow. They were forced to abandon most of their heavy equipment, including an 800-pound iron engine they brought with them to help mine when they made it to the Klondike. The men were haggard. Most had lost at least 25 pounds. They had scraggly beards and were filthy. They trekked through the woods, and before they reached the Tanana River, another one of the party died due to fever. As September set in, they realized that they weren't going to make it through the woods before winter hit. So they threw together a hovel made out of green alder logs and buckled down to wait out the winter. For up to 20 hours a day, they were confined to their sleeping bags, only leaving their sleeping bags to make food, which was normally raw meat, raw beans, and raw flour, because they couldn't spare the heat to cook the food. Being confined to their bags for that long meant that they got bed sores, and they also became rheumatic. Their beards grew to over a foot in length, and they were so bored that some of them would scream at random times just to allay the boredom. They had one book, and that was a Bible, and each of them read it over and over and over again, to the point where they suffered a type of, quote, snow blindness from reading. Under these conditions, each man confessed everything that they'd ever done in their life, their worst sins, things that one of the party said that none of them would have confessed under the worst types of torture in any other circumstances. Somehow they made it through the long winter, and as the snow started to thaw, they had a couple choices. The mineralogists decided that the only thing that they could do was try to mine gold where they were. So they constructed a windlass. It's a crank with a bucket attached to it that they used to remove dirt and rock from a mine shaft, sunk a shaft, and pantomime gold mining. They didn't find anything because there was no gold in the area. 3 of the party became disillusioned with everything, grabbed a few supplies, and headed off towards the St. Elias Range, where they were promptly buried in a spring avalanche. So now there were only 9 members of the party left. Gold no longer mattered to them. All they wanted to do was escape. To do that, they decided to head to the Tanana River, but before they could set out, another member of the party died of scurvy. The 8 of them packed up their meager provisions and headed through the forest. Their clothes were in tatters by this point. Their shoes were absolutely shredded. Their socks were tied to their feet in a vain attempt to keep them warm. The cold at night was so bad that they had to club each other with sticks in their own fists to restore circulation. And they almost ran out of supplies when they ran into a group of Native Americans who gave them sealskin coats, fur mucklucks, and some dried salmon. With these meager provisions, they set out in what they thought was the right direction to find civilization and to avoid the hateful glacier that they had to cross the year before. So now that they had new clothes and food, they set off through the forest again. This was the last push. They had to make it out now. After hacking their way through the forest for weeks, they stumbled back out onto a glacier. They thought maybe they could get around it, but try as they might, they could not find a way out of the forest or away from the glacier. And it was the same glacier they had crossed the year before. With no other alternative, they set out back across the glacier. The second trip was far worse than the first. The storms were horrendous. The surface of the glacier was like razor blades. One member of the party's feet swelled up to twice their normal size before he ended up dying. The winds were so heavy they could not light a fire. They were forced to eat the rest of their provisions raw. When all of their food ran out, they slaughtered the dogs and ate them. Now completely insane, they stumbled around for weeks in the storms, barely clinging to life. One day, the 7 men woke up and saw that the storms were clearing, and off in the horizon, there was a blue crescent. After some wondering, they realized it was the Pacific Ocean. With the last strength they had, they stumbled across the glacier and onto the beach, where they promptly slaughtered the rest of the dogs and ate them, and then curled up in their sleeping bags, waiting for either rescue or death. It was in this condition that the US ship Wolcott found them. And when they sent people out to investigate, they found that 3 of the men were dead in their sleeping bags, and the other 4 were barely clinging to life. There's an interesting part of the story. After they were rescued, the Seattle Times reported that they had found $500,000 in gold, which was not true at all. The only thing that they found was a lifetime of disability and pain. 2 of the men were rendered nearsighted by the snow blindness, and the other 2 were completely blind. Well, the story is pretty morbid, and it's sad because these guys could have avoided their horrendous experience. It also goes to show the pull that a gold rush or any other mining rush has on people, and that even though they arrived there and they knew they should have turned back after their initial provisions were destroyed by salt water, the lust for gold pushed them forward. I'm torn between reverence and disgust at what they tried, and it's truly amazing that any of them survived. So thanks for watching this video, and I'm going to try to shoot some more videos where we tell some of these stories as I'm out exploring this winter, if I can't get to more mines. If you have any suggestions, please let me know. I'd love to be able to tell some stories that I haven't heard of that you might find interesting or think are worth telling. Other than that, thank you so much for joining me on these beautiful, cold and snowy days, and I look forward to my next video.